All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast. We are your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. My name is Robert Winfrey, and I am your host, per usual. Thank you all very much for tuning in. I deeply appreciate it. Um, yeah, especially this time of year. I don't feel like going deep into it, but, this time of year kind of sucks. And having something that I can kind of look forward to every week. I know I don't have the world's largest audience, but I got you guys, but there are people out there who listen, or a bunch of automated bots downloading it, giving me a false sense of my audience size, which, you know what? I will live in ignorance for the moment of that and just be happy. So yeah, thank you. On the agenda this evening, we have a preview for UFC on ESPN Plus 108. That will be coming your way Saturday, more in the morning, because they're in Saudi Arabia. And they're trying really hard not to conflict with the WWE's Royal Rumble. So I imagine there won't be too much overlap there. Actually, when exactly does this start? Hang on, I can double check that right now. So the prelims start at 7 a.m. my time, so 9 in the East. You have to be up early for that. I don't want to get up early. Yeah, I'll make it work. See, so give or take 6 hours. That's 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1. Call it 2-ish by the time it's all said and done. Probably 1:30. Ideally before 1, but that kind of depends on, finishes and pacing and a lot of other things. With that main event, I think the over is more likely, for the record. So, we'll have to see. But when does, out of curiosity, the Rumble start? That starts at, that'll be my time it's listed as? Yeah, so that's 6 Eastern, so 4 my time. It is entirely possible for me to cover both of those if necessary. Oh, that's terrible. I've done it before. I could do it. I haven't been asked to cover the Rumble yet, but I think I have covered it the last couple of years, is why I bring it up. Um, so we'll see. That's possible. That's really all I wanted to double check was, is that even feasible if I get asked? So it is. Joy. That means it's on the table, and, well, we'll see how that goes. Anyway, so UFC event, we'll be previewing that. I have some brief thoughts. PFL had their Road to Dubai BS card. I shouldn't say that because two fights on there I want to talk about, but the PFL is just kind of a disaster organizationally. Talk about some few things in particular, but and the GFL had their draft, and man, I have to talk a little bit about it. Yeah, so I'll save the rancor for when I get to it. That's what's going to be on the agenda this evening, barring something else coming, breaking in the MMA space between now and the end of this episode when I check for new things that are breaking. So that's what we got. Uh, as always, thank you for listening. Any way you can interact with the product is always appreciated, but if you can't, just listening to it at all is, uh, shouldn't say more than I deserve because I don't want to put myself down quite like that, but it really is the most important thing. Because if you like and you comment and you're subscribed, but you never actually listen, you just kind of blitz through and like fill in some stuff, like you're gonna inflate some of my numbers, but that kind of defeats the purpose. And I'd rather have content actually engaged with than automated interactivity. I suppose might be the way to phrase that. Anyway, thank you all again. It means a lot to me. So let's jump into this, shall we? So UFC on ESPN Plus 108, as mentioned, they are in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. So it means there's a lot of the usual suspects in terms of who's going to be on this card, but let's run through this anyway, shall we? You have a pretty good main event here. Former middleweight champion Israel Adesanya takes on Nasruddin Imavov. This is Adesanya's first non-title fight in a really long time. Yeah, since 2019. So he comes into the UFC in 2018. Wins what, 4 fights that year in the UFC? 1, 2, 3. Yeah, wins 4 fights. Then in 19 beats Anderson Silva, wins the interim. So it's a title fight. Is why I bring it up. It's an interim title fight, but it's still a title fight. Beats Kelvin Gastelum, then becomes the undisputed champion at the end of 2019 when he beats Robert Whittaker. So starting in April of 2019, it's title fight for that one. Title fight against Whittaker, title fight against Romero, title fight against Costa. Light heavyweight title fight, still a title fight against Blachowicz, title fight against Vettori, title fight against Whittaker, title fight against Cannonier, 2 title fights with Pereira, title fight where he loses to Sean Strickland, and then a title fight against Dricus du Plessis in August of last year. So for the first time since... So his last non-title fight was against Anderson Silva, February 10th of 2019. So for almost 6 years, that man has been in nothing but title fights. That's kind of nutty when you actually break it down and look at it. And that's a fairly decent level of activity for a 6-year period of time. Good grief. Yeah, and some truly, I mean, he's a little bit, up and down in that some of these performances are genuinely spectacular, some of them are kind of lackluster. Um, but I mean, dude, his knockout over Pereira is still one of those a profoundly impressive moment. So anyway, his first non-title fight in almost 6 years. And then on the other side we have Imavov, who I've actually been decently high on. His only losses in the UFC. Early in his career, he had a majority decision loss to Phil Hawes, who at the time was actually thought of decently. Wound up kind of washing out, but thought of decently. Wins 3 in a row, then has a last-minute replacement fight against Sean Strickland. Strickland replaces, who did he replace? Gastelum. Right. Strickland wins that fight. Then he has the no contest with Chris Curtis. That was unfortunate. Then he beats Roman Dolidze. He kind of got lucky on that majority decision because he landed a pretty blatantly illegal soccer kick. Had a point deducted for it. He stopped Jared Cannonier. That stoppage is somewhat disputed. And then he beat Brendan Allen his last time out. So, again, I think decently highly of Imavov. And I think it'd be foolish to overlook him here. I'm going to pick Adesanya. Let me just get that out of the way. But I am not sure where Adesanya's career is going. I am not sure where his head is. It was noted by a lot of people after that loss to du Plessis. Some of the way he reacted to that loss is not in... It's not how he would have reacted earlier in his career to it. Now, that's not a value judgment. I'm not saying he handled some losses. He would have handled losses better in his earlier career, but if you look at the way he talks about it, it's not the same as the way the Pereira loss kind of ate at him, or some of these other ones. And some of that is just maturation and growing away from I shouldn't say unhealthily competitive. You can maybe argue unhealthily. But from a seriously competitive mindset to the point where it's, again, unhealthily pathological, to being a bit more circumspect. I mean, Adesanya, he's 35. He's had a lot of fights between MMA, boxing, and kickboxing. I think between the three of them, he has 100 wins. Over, actually. He has 28, excuse me, he has 24 MMA wins, 75 kickboxing wins, and then 5 boxing wins. So yeah, he's a little over 100 total wins across 3 combat sports. Total number of fights that we have records for, and it's probably a little more than that because not all of the kickboxing you do in China and whatnot gets reported accurately. But at that point, it'd be what, 28, 80, so 108. So yeah, he's over 100 fights that we know about between those 3 sports. So he's kind of entering a little bit more elder statesman era of his career, a little bit more circumspect. This isn't the guy who won his UFC debut and said, this is my ring. I just pissed all over it. If you want to fight me about it, come and find me. He's not that guy anymore. Um, and that has positives and negatives. I don't think you want anyone to stay in that kind of younger, super aggressive, competitive mindset for a long time. It's not healthy over the long term. It can be very good for your career in spurts, but so point there being, I'm not sure where he's going because there's not a lot of controversy in that loss to Duplessis. He got finished. If Sean Strickland regains the belt, you could maybe argue for a rematch there, given that their first fight was a clear non-controversial Strickland win, but you could make the argument for maybe another crack at that one. He's still sticking around at middleweight. This fight is going to be informative about his genuine trajectory because it's not that losing to Imavov is some damning indictment on you as a fighter. It's not. He's pretty good. But if Adesanya still has designs on championship aspirations, losing to Imavov would be an indicator that's probably not going to happen at this point. So, again, I'm picking Adesanya, but if your default is that the Adesanya of his, big run is going to show up and just clown on Imavov, I find that unlikely. I think Imavov is going to try and clinch and wrestle him a little bit. If this were 3 rounds, I would actually give Imavov a better shot because Imavov over 5 rounds actually does have some fading down the stretch. And having to fight really, really disciplined, really consistently against Adesanya is a big ask. It can be done. It's just very difficult. So, going with Adesanya, but that's a perfectly acceptable main event. For a fight night card, former champion. This is also a thing for Imavov. This is going to be informative for him too, because if he beats Adesanya, or if he loses like a super narrow, hyper competitive decision, that is going to be a little informative about him as well. We've kind of been personally, again, I've been watching him for a little bit. Positive in general on him. But he's going to get to a point real quick where if he's going to turn into a title level fighter, a championship caliber guy, he's got to hit that mark fairly soon. He's only, 29? Yeah, he's only 29. He'll be 30 in a couple of months. So he's not that far out of 30. But that's kind of the point at which he needs to be really, if he's going to make a legitimate run, he needs to really start ascending now. Not impossible to do it later, but ideally now is when you do it. So it's informative for both guys. I think they match up stylistically in some interesting ways. I don't expect this to be a war. Neither guy is... It's not that Adesanya is never in wars, but he is... It's more infrequent for him to be in a knockdown, drag-out affair. If he's in fights that go long, they tend to be more technical and than like blood and guts. So, and Imavov is not much of a blood and guts fighter either. So I expect this will. I find it unlikely that it outright sucks, but I don't expect this to be like high on fight of the year discussion when it's all said and done. Now, sticking with Adesanya, but going to be informative for both guys, how this goes. Co-main event, Shara Magomedov and Michael Page. Michael Page moving up to middleweight for this one. I assume, I don't know why. Because MVP, Michael Venom Page, kind of just does what he wants to do. Um, there's going to be some size issues here. Oh, I did not have one of my tabs opened appropriately. There we go. Okay, so, because Magomedov is a legitimate middleweight. He's 6'2", you know, big guy. He's not a huge middleweight because there's some big middleweights, but he couldn't make one. I don't think he could really make welterweight at this point. He's had a couple of fights there in the past, but I don't think it's. Yeah, he was much younger when he did that. So at this point, I think welterweight is probably not feasible for him. So he's 15-0, 4-0 in the UFC. Uh, Limited, but has a bit of a following because he's not a boring fighter by and large. And a really nice, knockout last year when he knocked out Armin Petrosian with that double spinning back fist. Page, at 37, he's kind of just here to make as much money as he can. Because he's coming off of the loss to Ian Machado Gary, where, he actually got close to winning that fight. Odds are with Magomedov. I'm super tempted to pick Page because it would be funny. I know the odds are with Magomedov. I'm thinking, how heavy are they with him? Not super. The odds are about right here. Most odds are about minus 180 for Magomedov, plus 150 for Page, somewhere in that range. That's about fair. I don't think that's unreasonable. Again, if I were to pick Page at this point, it would more be because I think it would be funny if he wins than because I think he's, super likely to. I do think he is capable of winning this fight, but, what's likely? The size is an issue. Magomedov's defense is fairly reaction based. And that can be a problem with someone as quick as Page, especially guys long as Page. I mean, Page's reach, 79 inches. Yeah, he's actually got a longer reach than Magomedov. Magomedov's only 60 or 73, so 6 inches of reach. That's nothing to sneeze at if you're Page. Hey, Page is 6'3"? Dang, he's big for a welterweight. Yeah, I know why I forgot because he's only fought like Gary and Holland, and Gary and Holland are both lanky welterweights. Okay, hang on. If that physicality is not quite where, again, I think Magomedov is a bit more natural for that weight class if you look at his body type. Whereas Page making welterweight, if you look at him, like you can kind of see how he does it. He's a fairly lean guy, but some of that size difference is actually a little bit more in Page's fit. You know what? Let's take a flyer. I've been coming around to Magomedov in general, but I'm still not as sold on him as some other people have started to get. Maybe I'm just really late to jump on the train. I've been that in the past, but let me go with Page. I'll take a flyer on him as a dog here. I don't hate that. Heavyweights. Oh, joy. Sergey Pavlovich and Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Okay, this is not the worst heavyweight fight you could make. There are 3 heavyweight fights on this card. Good grief. Oy, that's bad. Anyway, Pavlovich and Rozenstruik, not a bad fight. Pavlovich coming off of that loss to Volkov. That exposed a few flaws in his game, but I don't think Rozenstruik is the kind of guy who can capitalize on that because Volkov used a lot of his physical gifts to really make that work. And Rozenstruik doesn't have some of the same physical dimensions that Volkov does, because Volkov is very large. And Rozenstruik's also more hittable than Volkov. I'm okay going Pavlovich here. I'm not trying to diss on Rosenstruik, but if Pavlovich learned the right lessons, because Pavlovich has a long reach. He doesn't look it, but that dude's got a crazy ape index. He's actually got really long arms. And he's got serious, serious power. So Rosenstruik is no one to trifle with, but I'm okay going Pavlovich. Interesting one at bantamweight here I got to think about for a minute. We have Said Nurmagomedov, who certainly a good fighter. His only UFC losses are earlier in his career to Hani Barcelos and then Jonathan Martinez. Most recently, so his UFC run goes like this: beats Justin Scoggins, beats Ricardo Ramos, actually stopped him really nicely. Loses to Barcelos, beats Mark Striegel, beats Cody Stamen, beats Douglas Silva de Andrade, beats Saidu Kub Kakramanov. He struggled with Kakramanov before he caught him in that ninja choke, but he did. Loses to Jonathan Martinez. No shame there. Martinez is pretty good. And then chokes out Muin Gafarov in his last fight. So he's no one to trifle with. And then we have Vinicius Oliveira, and Lockdog is absolutely no one to trifle with. He's 21-3. What, 2-0 in the UFC? Yeah, that beautiful knockout over Bernardo Sopai last year, as well as beating Ricky Simone. So Oliveira is certainly no one to trifle with, and if he could give Nurmagomedov problems. He's lanky he's pretty long for the division. He's got power. His counter wrestling is not the best based on what we've seen, but it's good. And if your gas tank fades against that guy, he will murder you down the stretch. He is merciless. The odds are with Nurmagomedov. I understand why. He's a bit more proven. They're not hugely with him. Again, we're less than 2-1, like minus 170 to minus 190, somewhere in that range, more or less. I think that's right. I'm going to go with Nurmagomedov here, but yeah, Oliveira can absolutely win this fight, so we'll see. Featherweight next, Muhammad Naimov and Khan Ofli. Excuse me. Ofli is Turkish. 11-3-1. Lost his UFC debut to Myron Santos. Didn't look awful. Came off of, isn't he also Australian? Like, nationality's Turkish, but isn't he fight out? Yeah, he's okay. Yeah, okay. So yeah, that Myron Santos fight wasn't that like the finale of that season of Tough? Not a terrible fight, actually, if memory serves. So Offley's not bad. I just think Naimov's pretty good. He's 3-1 in the UFC. His only loss is to Felipe Lima. He actually did a decent number on Lima for the first 2 rounds, but he faded down the stretch, and Lima was able to punish him for it and find a choke. I'm pretty fine picking Naimov here. I still think I think Naimov's pretty good, and I'm less convinced about Offley. Okay, heavyweights. Oh God, why? Shamil Gaziev and Thomas Peterson. They're trying to give. I'm not trying to be too dismissive of Mr. Peterson here, but Shamil Gaziev, 13-1, coming off of that loss to Jairzinho Rozenstruik between rounds 4 and 5. Beat Dontel Mays his last time out. They're kind of trying to get him back on track because he's Bahrainian, and they're in that part of the world. And Thomas Peterson is 9-2, 1-1 in the UFC. Beat Muhammad Usman his last time out, but don't think Muhammad Usman's very good. He lost to Jamal Poogs before that. Like, they want Gaziev to get this win. And when the UFC tends to matchmake like this, more often than not, they get it the way they want it to. I'll go with Gaziev. Probably going to suck as a fight. Crappy heavyweights. Lightweights next, Abdul Karim Al-Sawadi against Bolaji Oki. And you can kind of tell what the UFC would like to have to happen here. What are the odds on this one? Odds are with... Oh, did this change? Did this used to be... I think this used to be Levitt, right? Yeah, I actually would have picked Levitt. But instead we have Oki, and actually people are favoring Oki over Al-Sawadi, whereas they weren't... Maybe the Levitt fight didn't stick around long enough to get odds actually moving on it. So let's have a quick look here. Let's see. Where is this? This is further down. There you are. Okay. Al-Sawadi is 15-4. Lost his UFC debut to Loic Radzhabov. That was actually kind of funny. Because they kind of wanted Al-Sawadi to win that, and Radzhabov's like, nope. Oki, 9-2, 1-1 in the UFC. Lost to Chris Duncan his last time out. It's not hugely... it doesn't build a lot of confidence, but I'll go with Oki. I'll go with the odds here. Al-Sawadi did not look terribly impressive. Lightweight next is again Terrence McKinney and Damir Hadzovic. Boy, can I not get a handle on Terrence McKinney. That guy's all over the place. Coming off a loss to Esteban Ribovic, who head kicked him in 37 seconds. He'd stopped a couple of guys before that. Look, McKinney is a good TV fighter. Like, he's up and down a lot, but he's very, very rarely, if ever, in a boring fight. So give him respect on that one. Hadzovic, 1-3 in his last 4. Lost to Christos Giagos, Renato Moicano, and coming off a loss to Mark Chikadze. Beat Yancy Medeiros in the middle of that. Been out of action since July of 22. It's a long layoff. Some of that's injury, some of that's visa issues, or that's just a pretty serious layoff. I think the odds are with McKinney. Given the layoff, I can absolutely see that, but ooh, those are bit. They got McKinney at like minus 400, minus 350 to minus 400. That's asking for trouble given his unreliability, folks. Just saying that. I'm picking him, but I would not be comfortable holding those odds. Because Hadzovic is not a scrub. Lightweight again. Again, there's 3 in a row there. That's nice. Faris Ziam, the Smile Killer, and Mike Davis. So Ziam coming off of that beautiful knockout of Matt Frivola last year. Just that knee out of the clinch. Ooh. That finished high in my knockout of the year rankings. He's on a 4-fight winning streak overall. His only UFC losses, he lost his UFC debut to Don Madge and then 1-2 and then lost to McKinney and hasn't lost since. He's looked really good as of late. He's really started kind of putting things together. I didn't think there was a whole lot of split in his win over Claudio Puelles. And then Mike Davis, Beast Boy. Hard guy to get a hand. Had a tough UFC debut when he lost to Gilbert Burns. Won 4 in a row since. Thomas Gifford, Mason Jones, Vyacheslav Borshov, and then Natan Levy. So he's kind of on the come up. This is not a bad fight. Ziam's dimensions for lightweight are just kind of absurd, though, and they give people problems. The odds are with Davis. I can see why. I'm going to go with Ziam. Might be wrong there, but I don't want to just pick favorites. Again, I find that to be a very poor way of doing this kind of thing. So I'll lean towards Ziam here, and I'll be okay with that. If he I'll be perfectly fine if he loses. Women's flyweight, Jasmine Jasdavicius and Myra Buena Silva. So Jasdavicius, on a 3-fight winning streak, 2-0 since returning to flyweight. She dabbled at bantamweight for a fight or two. Her current win streak is Priscilla Cachoeira, Fatima Klein, and Ariane De Silva. Again, that's not bad. She's, fairly big and decently athletic for the weight class, even though she's 35. And then Buena Silva has not won a fight since 23. She had a no contest with Holly Holm. She lost a title fight with Raquel Pennington. She lost to Macy Chasson due to a doctor stoppage. Yeah, that was a nasty cut. That was a fair stoppage. So she's moving down to flyweight here. Don't know how she's going to look. Odds are with Jasdavicius. She's slightly more proven in the weight class. I can understand that. And Buena Silva's fight with Pennington was pretty bad. I mean, that was pretty bad. Oh, I don't know about this one. Buena Silva has the tools to win this fight, but her at this weight class is kind of an unknown. Hang on, let me double check something on her. Has she ever fought at flyweight? I feel like she came into the UFC in flyweight, right? Yeah, she did. So her UFC time at flyweight, so it's not the first time. She comes in at flyweight, beats Jillian Robertson, loses to Marina Moroz, beats Mar Romeo Barella, fights to a draw with Montana De La Rosa, loses to Manon Fior, then moves up to bantamweight until now. So now she's coming back down. So this is her first trip back down to flyweight since 21. Okay. Am I really gonna trust the odds on this one? Buena Silva's just so up and down. Like she'll have moments of really good stuff, but she can't keep it going. All right, let me go with Jasmine here, but let me think about that one. I'll go with Jasmine for the moment, but I gotta think about that one a little bit more. Featherweights, Bogdan Grad and Lucas Alexander. I believe we have 2 UFC debutants here. So Grad is Austrian, which might mean that I'm mispronouncing that. I apologize if I am. He's 14-2. 3-fight winning streak coming into his UFC debut. That's respectable. His last loss was to Tom Nolan, who's in the UFC. Okay. And Alexander is 8-4. It's an iffy record to get into the UFC with. He's already in the UFC. Okay, hang on. Have a quick look here. Lost his UFC debut to Joe Anderson Brito. Not going to kill him for that one. Brito's okay. Beat Steven Peterson, who I think is not with the UFC anymore. Then missed weight and lost to Yika Saragi. That is not promising. I mean, Saragi's not, terrible, but they're moderately favorable matchmaking going on here in favor of Grad. This is certainly not the softest UFC debut I've ever seen, but this is far from the hardest. Just make sure that the odds are kind of with me on that one. Yeah, they're close, but they're with. Yeah, okay. I would be comfortable with slightly wider odds on this one. This is almost a pick 'em, but younger guys you may not be deeply familiar with, so who knows. And kicking everything off with heavyweights. Hamdi Abdelwahab and Jamal Poogs. Abdelwahab coming off of a no contest with Dontel Mays. He originally won a split decision, then failed a drug test. Okay. That's encouraging for your UFC debut, is it not? Poogs has been what, like 1-2, 2-3 in the UFC. He's 11-4, 2-1. Okay. Yeah, beat Josh Parisian, lost to Mick Parkin, beat Thomas Peterson. All right. This is not unfair matchmaking. Let me phrase it like that. Why is Abdelwahab listed as only 3-0 over here? I mean, okay, he had the no contest, but hang on, get that stuff out of here. What are they not? What is so? Tapology has him at 3-0 with a no contest. What is he on Wiki? They're counting. Oh, he had a couple of bare knuckle MMA fights. Okay. I can see the argument for either way that being that how that should be counted actually. Huh. You know, we're gonna actually have to have that discussion. Do we consider bare knuckle MMA fights MMA fights? And I don't know how we should handle that. My hunch is to just count them, but I can understand why you wouldn't. Anyway, so that mystery over, that mystery having been figured out now. Where are the odds on this one? The odds are almost a pick'em. Maybe a slight edge. One place has a slight edge for Abdelwahab. One place has a slight edge for Poogs. I. All right, let me check a few physical dimensions very briefly. So Abdelwahab is 6'2". He's short for a heavyweight. 73 inches of reach. I mean, 6'2 is not short by an objective measure, but for heavyweights, most heavyweights are a little bit bigger than that. I mean, Poogs is 6'3". And let me go with Poogs, I guess. I have no idea about that one. So yeah, that's where we are. So Saturday morning, 9 a.m. Eastern Time, I will be covering that in the MMA Zone of 411mania.com. So stop by, say hello. I appreciate that. I will be probably a little bit sleep deprived covering that one. So yay me. All right. That's that. Okay. Let's move on then, shall we? So I'm going to kind of lump these together, talking about the PFL event and then the GFL draft. So if you're looking at the chapters and the timestamps or whatnot, I'm going to put them together. I apologize. I don't feel like breaking up, but I don't think I'm going to talk a whole lot about each one too long. So I don't feel like differentiating that over a matter of like 5 minutes. I don't know. We'll see. Might be very wrong about that. So PFL had their Champion Series, Road to Dubai, whatever stupid subheading we're giving it. But they had two relevant fights. The main event, Usman Nurmagomedov defeats Paul Hughes via majority decision. There was a 47-47 and two 48-46s. Now, there was a point deducted to Nurmagomedov for a groin kick in round 3. With the point deduction, I thought a draw was more correct. Just throwing that out there. But that's just me. I don't think it's wholly out of bounds to give Nurmagomedov the win. But this was one of the better fights that the PFL could have made. These are two very good lightweights. These are two lightweights who would not be out of place in the UFC. Um, not just in the UFC at all, but like at near the top of the division. Like these could be ranked guys in the UFC right now. They're that good. So was a good fight. Wanted to because I give PFL some grief. I need to make sure I give them their credit when it's due. It's due here. This fight's worth a watch. Briefly on the co-main event, Vadim Nemkov runs over Timothy Johnson 308 of the first with a rear naked choke. This was the last fight on Nemkov's Bellator slash PFL deal. My hunch is this was originally there was like there was promotional material that like yeah Nemkov's gonna have a rematch with Corey Anderson at light heavyweight. Nemkov apparently never agreed to that. The PFL was just out there saying it because promotions will always do that. So they threw Timothy Johnson in there at heavyweight. Um, this seems like what they're going to wind up doing is trying to dangle, hey, you could fight Francis Ngannou when he's back in MMA later this year, or like late this year. I think his next MMA fight is going to be like far down the line. Um, Nemkov, Nemkov's good. If he wants to stick around for the fight with Francis Ngannou because that will pay him well, I wouldn't blame him. But I don't think the PFL has much to offer him at either heavyweight or light heavyweight outside of that, depending on his ambition. I would like to see him in the UFC. He's a good fighter. But he should be wherever he's able to make the most money and maximize his earning potential. My fantasy matchmaking is utterly immaterial. The rest of that card, is there anything else I wanted to mention out of here? No, not really. Yeah. So not really, but you know, I wanted to give him props because Usman Nurmagomedov and Paul Hughes is a good fight. Um, and that was an important fight for them to make because it's two of their better guys fighting it out for a belt. This was for the technically the Bellator lightweight title. I assume that's going to be folded into the PFL one at this point because Bellator's no more. That's all kind of a mess, so who knows. But that was a pretty good fight. Usman Nurmagomedov he's not perfect. There's still stuff he's got to work on, but he definitely has a very high ceiling. Okay, and let's talk about the GFL then, shall we? Because they had one of the most comical events I've seen in a long time. They had a terrible song. They like had AI generated images of the fighters walking out in terrible uniforms. It's comical. Just comical. I don't have any other way to say it. There's also some weirdness around a few guys being like Chris Weidman, who just retired, got drafted, and there's issues around that. Holly Holm got drafted. That's not surprising. Hey, Fabricio Verdum did, and remember when he said that he has an inoperable cyst in the middle of his brain? I remember that. So that's iffy. Like, there's some of these people who are like, oh yeah, Rashad Evans. Like, hey, Rashad Evans got drafted. He's like, yeah, the hell I did. I have no interest in that. Tony Ferguson got released from the UFC, which is appropriate but hurt because I watched Tony's entire UFC career. His season of The Ultimate Fighter was one of the last ones I kind of half watched. Because I mostly watched that one, and then the year after was when I bailed on it. Because the year after was Miller and Bisping, and that was just it was unwatchable. I found it utterly unwatchable. But yeah, man, Tony's run was so good. And for a while, he was the boogeyman. He would change you. And then, but when the wheels came off of that, man, they came off in a hurry. Um, yeah. But yeah, so Frank Mir got drafted. I don't know that anything comes out of that, but I don't know about Mir. Is there anyone funny? Because they did this kind of by region, and then ultimately just wound up drafting people who fight and live and train out of those areas. Like, oh, upstate New York has drafted Chris Weidman. Like, really? You surprised by that? Look at all the people drafted by the Miami team. All the people that train out of American Top Team, you mean? I mean, it's not a joke. Like Robelis to Spain, Junior Dos Santos, Yoel Romero, like Gleison Tebow. It's just guys that train out of Miami. Um, ugh. Yeah, this was badly done. This whole thing is an exercise in futility slash stupidity. Uh, I got nothing for this, man. Look, there's a handful of younger fighters that might have some upside in the GFL, but we're not even sure the GFL is actually going to have any fights or an event or anything approximating that. Like, this is such a weird thing, and this was so badly done. I mean, at one point they tried to give like Abubakar Nurmagomedov Anthony Pettis' stat line. Then they misspelled Anthony Pettis. Like, we all roasted Reebok over Giblert Melendez, right? Um, uh, yeah, just sad. Just sad. So we'll see if anything actually comes of this nonsense, but I would not have high hopes for it at this point. Because I have very few high hopes for most things in MMA these days, but that's another discussion. All right. Now we just passed. We are a little over the 45-minute mark. I am going to check the old social medias, see if anything crazy MMA related is broken. If not, we will do plugs and get out of here. Nope, nothing new there as it pertains to MMA, at least. So, let's see, plugs. Monday, myself and Mark Radulich will be doing a triple feature for some Oscar-nominated movies. We have briefly touched on a couple of these before, but they're going to get more in-depth reviews now. We will be reviewing A Complete Unknown, which we briefly touched on in the past. Mark kind of saw it, liked it, and pitched me on it. Conclave, and The Brutalist. I have not seen The Brutalist yet. I will be watching that, obviously, before the review. But so you can listen to Mark and I talk about those if you like me listening to me. If you like listening to me talk about movies, we're gonna try and hammer that out. So we'll have something. I have thoughts. I have serious thoughts on a few of these. I'm gonna try not to get too heated about Conclave because, well, I, I, I can raise my objections without becoming incensed. I need to be able to do that on that one. So tune in if you're interested in that. Let's see, the usual spate of wrestling coverage. Actually, last week I covered TNA Genesis. It was 2 weeks ago, so you already know about that one. But I did cover TNA Genesis 2025. That was a thing. I covered WWE SmackDown on Fridays, UFC events on Saturdays when they have them. So the UFC event this Saturday, obviously. And next week we will be back here to review UFC on ESPN Plus 108. And we will preview UFC. I'm listing that for. Yeah, they are. Okay. Because they're in Australia. We will preview UFC 312. Headlined by the rematch between Dricus du Plessis and Sean Strickland. That's a fine fight. Co-main event for the strawweight title, Zhang Wei Li and Tatiana Suarez. That's kind of it. The rest of this card is just not pay-per-view quality. I'm not trying to be mean about this, okay? Look, here's the rest of the pay-per-view card. You ready for this? You got the 2 title fights. Fine. Your next fight is Justin Tafa and Taliesin Teixeira, followed by Jimmy Crute and Rodolfo Bellato, and Jake Matthews versus Francisco Prado. That's barely acceptable as the main card for an ESPN Plus show, much less a pay-per-view. Jack Jenkins on the prelims. I like Jack Jenkins, so that's fine. Hyunsung Park and Nyamrajal Tumendenberel. I was not unimpressed with Tumendenberel's UFC debut. I know he lost, but um, yeah, this is a bad pay-per-view card. This is not even a very good event overall. It's a very bad. This thing is hanging by a thread, man. If something happens to both of those title fights, they're screwed. They don't even have backups on the card. There's not another middleweight fight on this card, and there's not another strawweight fight on this card. Oh my. Oh, I hope nothing happens to those fights, but you're once again putting me in a position where it would be hilarious if it did. I don't like being in that position, but man, that would be funny. Yeah, this is not a good card. It's just, I don't have another way to say that. It's not a good card. We'll preview it next week, though, so come back for that. All right. That's going to be it for me, everybody. Thank you all very, very much for tuning in. I appreciate the heck out of you. Stay safe out there and continue to be well, be safe, and behave.